On March 23, 2020, police and fire responded to a 15-year-old suicide threat at a home in Strongsville, Ohio. The girl was not taken to the hospital. Her parents told officers they didn't believe she would hurt herself. 28 months later, that same girl drove a car 100 miles per hour into a brick building and killed 2 young men. This is a documented walk through 12 warning signs that arrived between those 2 dates, and the adults who saw each one. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He was the youngest of 7 children. He texted his father, "Love you, Dad," at 3 in the morning because that was the kind of son he was. Davian Flanagan was 19. He was a former football player whose college aspirations had ended after a torn ACL. He was Dominic's friend in the back seat of a Toyota Camry on the morning of July 31st, 2022. Neither one of them is the warning sign in this video. The warning signs are about Mackenzie Shirilla, and they began long before either of these young men got into that car. My dear friend, before we jump into this tragic story, I need to ask something important. Please hit the like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and share this video. In the comments below, write your city and what time you're watching this. Now let's talk about what a warning sign actually is and what it isn't. A warning sign in this video meets 3 tests. It is dated. We know the day or the week it happened. It is documented. A police report, a court record, a sworn statement, a recovered phone video, an audio recording, and it was met with a choice by an adult who had the power to act. Not a feeling, not a suspicion. A documented decision to do nothing or to do less than the situation called for. 12 signs meet all 3 tests. 7 of them happened before the crash. 5 of them happened after. We are going to walk through every single one. Now let's talk about sign number 1. On the afternoon of March 23rd, 2020, the Strongsville Police Department and the Strongsville Fire Department dispatched a unit to the Shirilla family home in response to a reported suicide threat by a 15-year-old female. That 15-year-old was Mackenzie Shirilla. According to the police report, cited in trial evidence and public reporting, Mackenzie was not taken to a hospital. The reason recorded in the report is that her parents told responding officers they did not, quote, think her threats are real, and did not believe she would hurt herself. That decision was made by Steve and Natalie Shirilla. It was made on the record, in the presence of trained first responders who had been called to their home, for exactly this reason. Think about what that means. In Ohio, parents of a minor have the legal right to decline psychiatric hospitalization. That protocol exists for legitimate reasons. But the protocol relies on parents making an accurate assessment of their child's risk. The Shirillas, in March of 2020, assessed the risk as low enough that no further intervention was needed. No documented follow-up appointment with a psychiatrist. No documented behavioral health plan. No documented removal of access to means. 28 months later, that same girl was driving a car at 100 miles per hour into a brick wall. The 2020 call is not just the first warning sign. It is the foundation on which every subsequent warning sign was built, because every adult who would later choose inaction had a precedent. The first inaction had already been chosen. 3.5 years after the 2020 call, Natalie Shirilla took the witness stand at her daughter's murder trial. In sworn testimony, she said she had never perceived Mackenzie to be suicidal. That statement is on the trial record. Now compare it to what is also on the record. In March of 2020, when police and fire arrived at her home in response to a documented suicide threat by her 15-year-old daughter, Natalie Shirilla declined hospitalization on the grounds that she did not think her daughter's threats were real. Both statements exist. Both came from the same mother. Both were made under different incentives. The first one in front of officers responding to a crisis, the second one in a courtroom defending her daughter against murder charges. Think about what that means. Either Natalie Shirilla's 2020 assessment was wrong, in which case she knew her daughter was capable of self-harm and chose not to act, or her 2023 testimony was wrong, in which case she said something under oath that the police report directly contradicts. There is no version of this case where both statements can be true. The court record cannot reconcile them. And the contradiction itself is sign number 2, because the person who told a courtroom in 2023 that she had never seen warning signs is the same person who responded to one in 2020 by sending the first responders home. Between January of 2020 and the morning of the crash, Mackenzie sent Dominic Russo a sustained pattern of text messages that were obtained by police and later reported in court records. TMZ obtained the full text chain through the police investigation. The phrases that appear repeatedly include the following verbatim, quote, "I'm going to kill someone," quote, "I just want to bang my head on the wall till I'm dead," quote, "This is why I just want to effing KMS." KMS is text shorthand. It stands for kill myself. Other messages from the same chain reference not liking her house, feeling depressed, complaining about how Dominic treated her, getting tested for sexually transmitted infections, and concerns about a pregnancy that turned out to be negative. The texts span 2.5 years. They were on the same phone the parents had access to. They were never reported to a clinician of record. There is no version of this text record where a parent reading it would not see signs of a teenager in distress. The phrases KMS and "I just want to bang my head on the wall till I'm dead" are not adolescent venting in isolation. They are escalation, in writing, sent to a partner in a relationship that the court would later describe as severely abusive. Mackenzie's parents have publicly said that they were closely involved in their daughter's life. Steve told Netflix that he and Dominic were close, that Dominic was part of the family, that there was talk of marriage. The same closeness should have included awareness of what was on the phone. Think about what that means. Sign 3 is not the texts themselves. Sign 3 is the documented gap between parents who say they were close enough to see the relationship in the absence of any record of intervention after 2.5 years of suicide language. In June of 2022, approximately 6 weeks before the crash, Dominic Russo called his mother, Christine, from a moving car. He told her Mackenzie was driving erratically and dangerously. Christine, on the other end of the line, was concerned enough that she sent a family friend named Christopher Martin to physically intervene. Martin drove to the location of the car. He heard Mackenzie on the phone threatening Dominic. He testified that he heard Mackenzie say, quote, "I will crash this car." Verbatim. 6 weeks later, that is exactly what she did. Martin then arrived in person. He witnessed Mackenzie strike Dominic with both hands inside the vehicle. Dominic exited the car and left with Martin. All of this is in the public trial record. Now think about what that means in terms of who knew what. Dominic's mother knew. Christopher Martin knew. Dominic knew. The Russo family knew. By the standard of warning signs and the standard of accountability, the people who knew were the people whose son was the eventual victim, not the parents of the eventual perpetrator. There is no public record that Christine Russo or Dominic or Christopher Martin contacted Mackenzie's parents to tell them what had happened on Interstate 71 that day. And there is no record that Mackenzie's parents independently learned about the incident through their daughter. But there is also no record that the threat, "I will crash this car," made by a 17-year-old whose mother had already declined her hospitalization once, ever reached a clinician, a school counselor, or a court. Sign 4 is the gap between an actionable, verbal, witness-corroborated threat to commit the exact act, and the silence around it for 6 weeks until the threat was carried out. About 2 weeks before the crash, back in July 2022, Dominic Russo caught an incident at his own house on video. The video, recovered from his phone by Strongsville investigators after his death, captures Mackenzie banging on his door. She threatens to break in. She threatens to key his car. She threatens to break the door handle off. She is heard counting down, demanding that he open the door and saying, quote, "You're going to come open this door right now or there's going to be a serious problem." Dominic is heard trying to calm her down. He eventually stops recording and, according to the trial evidence, called his mother for help. Think about what that means. Dominic chose to document. He did not choose to leave. That is not a failure on Dominic's part. Victims of abusive relationships frequently do not leave, and this channel does not blame victims for what their abusers did. The point of Sign 5 is what the existence of the video tells us about what Dominic understood. He understood the relationship had reached a point where evidence preservation made sense. He understood that what was happening might one day need to be proven. That understanding existed in July of 2022. The same understanding did not appear to exist on the side of Mackenzie's parents, because if it had, the next sentence of this story would be, they took her phone, they took her car keys, they got her to a therapist that week. None of those sentences exist in the record. The video exists, the intervention does not. After the crash, while reviewing Mackenzie's social media history, investigators and family members noticed something specific. Mackenzie had posted Halloween photos of Dominic and Davian. In those photos, both young men were dressed as corpses. The exact date of the photos predates the crash. According to public reporting, Davian Flanagan's sister was the first person to flag the photos to police. Not because of the costumes themselves, but because of what the costumes implied in retrospect. Her family's suspicion that the crash might not have been an accident was, in part, triggered by the realization that Mackenzie had publicly shared imagery of the two eventual victims as dead bodies before they were dead bodies. Think about what that means. The Halloween photos by themselves are not evidence of premeditation. Teenagers post Halloween photos. Halloween involves corpse costumes. But the question is what an attentive adult looking at the broader pattern would have seen. By the date those photos were posted, the texts of Sign 3 already existed. By the date those photos were posted, the 2020 suicide threat was already on the record. By the date those photos were posted, Mackenzie's relationship with Dominic had already entered the territory the trial would later describe as severely abusive. The photos are Sign 6 because they sit inside a pattern that no one with full context appears to have been monitoring. Davian's sister saw them after the fact and recognized what they were inside the pattern. She was the family member of a victim. The family member of the perpetrator was, by every public account, the person closest to the social media account itself. At about 5:30, on the morning of July 31st, 2022, 3 people got into a 2018 Toyota Camry after attending a graduation party at a friend's house. Mackenzie was driving. Dominic was in the front passenger seat. Davian was in the back. Less than an hour later, 2 of them were dead and the car was embedded in the side of a brick building. When Strongsville investigators recovered the vehicle, the inventory of what was in it included the following: marijuana, a bong, a vape pen, a digital scale, psilocybin mushrooms. Mackenzie's toxicology came back with THC above Ohio's legal limit at the time of the crash. None of those items appeared in the car that morning by accident. The bong, the scale, the mushrooms, those are not party-acquired items. Those are items kept somewhere, owned, restocked. The items were transported in a car the parents had given their daughter access to without restriction. Steve Shirilla would later tell Netflix on camera that he had no problem with Mackenzie's drug use. He has since told TMZ that those comments were edited out of context, but the inventory list is not edited. It is a police record. Sign 7 is not the items themselves. Sign 7 is the documented absence of any restriction on the car, on the substances, on the relationship, in the final hours of a pattern that had been building for 28 months. For roughly 3 to 4 days after the crash, Natalie Shirilla told the Russo family that Mackenzie was unconscious, that she had not woken up, that she was in a coma. Christine Russo, Dominic's sister, has stated publicly on her podcast that her family was praying for Mackenzie's recovery during this window, unaware that, per People magazine's independent reporting, there is no medical record supporting any multi-day unconsciousness, and Mackenzie was active enough during her hospital treatment to upload photos to her social media account. Think about what that means. The pattern of sign 8 is identical to the pattern of sign 1. An adult in the Shirilla family was given a moment of high stakes, one in 2020, one in 2022. And in both moments, the adult chose a story that protected the family's preferred narrative over the truth. In 2020, the story was she's not really suicidal. In 2022, the story was she's unconscious. Neither story was supported by the documentary evidence. Both stories had the same author. At the hospital, Mackenzie and her mother began speaking in coded Pig Latin to avoid being understood by police and medical staff. In one of those coded conversations, decoded by investigators and later introduced at trial, Mackenzie asked her mother verbatim, "Can we tell the police I had a seizure?" Think about what that means. A person who has had a seizure does not ask whether they can tell people they had one. They tell people they had one. The phrasing, "Can we tell them?" is not a memory question. It is a fabrication question. And the adult being asked to authorize the fabrication was Natalie Shirilla. There is no public record that Natalie corrected her daughter. There is no public record that she told a nurse, a doctor, or an officer what her daughter had just asked. The medical defense that would later be presented in court, the Potts defense, was born in that coded conversation. The mother who declined to act in 2020 did not act in 2022 either. In the months between the crash in July of 2022 and her arrest in November of 2022, Mackenzie continued posting on social media. The prosecution introduced TikTok videos at her sentencing. Those videos included Mackenzie discussing a clothing brand partnership, a paid influencer arrangement, shortly after the funerals of the 2 friends she had killed. They also included a video in which she said on camera, quote, "I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die." Think about what that means. The clothing partnership did not arrange itself. Brand partnerships involve emails, contracts, and parental oversight when the influencer is a minor. The phone the videos were filmed on was the same phone her parents had access to. Sign 10 is the period when Mackenzie's public presentation became actively unrepentant, and the adults around her did not intervene then either. After her conviction in August of 2023, Mackenzie and her mother continued speaking on jail calls. People magazine released one of those recordings in May of 2026. In the call, Natalie tells Mackenzie that prison provides resources, schooling, mental health programs, because, quote, "Jail is supposed to rehabilitate people." Mackenzie responds, verbatim, "But I don't need to be rehabilitated, like I don't need that." Natalie's response on tape is this, quote, "Not you, but people that have been convicted of crimes, like actual criminals," unquote. Think about what that means. Mackenzie has at this point been convicted on 12 felony counts, including 4 counts of murder. Her own mother on a recorded line has just told her she is not, quote, "an actual criminal," Sign 11 is the same pattern as every prior sign. The mother is told that her daughter has done something dangerous. The mother declines to internalize what she has been told. The decline is captured in writing or in audio. The decline does not stop. On May 15, 2026, Netflix released The Crash. Steve and Natalie Shirilla appeared in the documentary defending their daughter. Steve's comments about Mackenzie's teenage marijuana use prompted complaints from parents at Mary Queen of Peace School in Cleveland, the Catholic school where Steve had taught art and digital media to children between the ages of 5 and 14 since January of 2019. By May 19th, 4 days after the documentary aired, Steve was placed on administrative leave. A Cleveland 19 News reported anonymous parent said the family's public response was, quote, drawing a scary amount of attention to our kids. Think about what that means. Sign 12 is the most recent decision. The Shirillas had the option in 2026 to remain silent on a streaming platform. They had the option to let the verdict stand. They chose to participate in a documentary that defended their daughter to an audience of millions. The consequence reached a Catholic elementary school in the same city. Children whose parents had trusted Steve Shirilla as their art teacher now had a national conversation about a convicted murderer at their school's doorstep. The pattern from 2020, the choice to protect the family narrative over the welfare of those affected by it, was visible again on screen in 2026. Look at the timeline you have just walked through. 12 dots, 861 days between the 1st and the 7th, 65 months between the 1st and the 12th. Each dot is a date. Each date is a documented behavior. Each behavior was met with an adult choice. The pattern is not subtle. The first inaction was in 2020. A documented suicide threat, dismissed. The last inaction was in 2026. A documented public defense of a convicted murderer, broadcast on Netflix, costing a Catholic school its art teacher. Between those two endpoints, every documented warning sign was met with the same response from the same two adults. Silence. Override. A different story than the one the evidence supported. This pattern does not require psychological diagnosis. The channel is not qualified to diagnose Mackenzie Shirilla. The court was qualified to convict her, and it did, on 12 felony counts, including 4 counts of murder. The point of behavioral pattern analysis is not to look inside Mackenzie's head. It is to look at the documented record around her, the police reports, the texts, the court testimony, the recovered videos, the jail calls, the Netflix interview, and to count how many times the adults closest to her saw what was happening and did less than the situation required. The count is 12. There may be more. The verified count in the public record is 12. 2 parties carry the accountability in this case. The first is Steve and Natalie Shirilla. Of the 12 signs, the parents were present for the 2020 suicide call, the access to the phone where the texts were sent, the access to the car that became the weapon, the items in the vehicle on July 31, 2022, the hospital window when the coma claim was made, the coded jail conversation about the seizure, the post-conviction call about actual criminals, and the Netflix appearance. They have not been charged with any crime. They are presumed innocent of any criminal allegation. But the documented behavioral record of inaction across 12 dated points is not a criminal question. It is a parental one. And the question stands, at which of those 12 points should an adult who loved this child have acted differently? The second is the protocol. In Ohio, parents of a minor can decline psychiatric hospitalization for that minor. The protocol exists for legitimate reasons: parental rights, false positive risk, the danger of involuntary commitment for ambiguous threats. But the protocol relies on the assumption that a parent in the room with police and fire responders who has been told their child made a suicide threat serious enough to summon both agencies will make an accurate assessment of risk. In March of 2020, 2 parents made the assessment that the threat was not real. 28 months later, the child the protocol allowed them to send back home had killed 2 young men. No individual officer who responded that day is named in this video. The officers followed protocol. The protocol itself is worth examining. It cost Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan their lives. There is one voice in this case that has not chosen inaction. It belongs to Frank Russo, Dominic's father. He has said publicly to NBC News that he does not want Mackenzie Shirilla to spend the rest of her life in prison. His exact words, quote, "It's horrible for everybody. Yeah, I lost my son. It's harder on our family, but I don't want the rest of her life ruined too," unquote. And his daughter, Christine Russo, Dominic's sister, has spent 4 years on her own podcast and in public interviews fighting to keep her brother's name accurate against the narrative the Shirilla family continues to produce. 2 members of the Russo family did the work that the protocol could not do and that the Shirillas chose not to do. The contrast is the whole video. Contrast is the 12 warning signs, 861 days from the first to the crash. Every one of them documented. Every one of them met with an adult choice. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.